I think you guys will get a little message that will pop up letting you know that this is now being recorded. But this is now being recorded. So I'm going to do that one more time. So thank you everyone for joining us for the BECOP event for this month, which is Business Systems Analysts and Requirement Traceability. We are fortunate to be joined by Stewart McMaken, who's a Senior Business Systems Analyst with ITS. Stewart is worked on projects with UCSD like Tririga, UC Path, Oracle Financials, and is now working on the new ESR Student Information System project. He's been a busy guy in his 4 years at UCSD. Before he was here, he worked as a software developer at UC Berkeley and UC Austin. So he's the perfect person to kind of talk through how to gather requirements, which I think often requires wearing different hats and speaking different language to merge what people think they want with what they truly really need and what can be accomplished with software. I've been lucky enough to work with Stewart before, and I've appreciated not only his upbeat attitude that makes meeting fun, but also his kind of like laser focus to be able to figure out what's truly important in a situation. What are those requirements? What are those things that we need to care about? And what are habits and traditions that we think we need, but maybe aren't actually as crucial to the process as we originally thought? So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Stewart to share his screen and get started.
Thanks, Nikki. That was a glowing intro. Was just aiming for good enough, but that was way better. All right. Y'all see my screen? Yeah, awesome. So yeah, my name's Stewart McMaken. As Nikki said, I used to be a programmer, but I got over it, right? I got tired of being given specs to say, build this thing that I knew was wrong. And then I would build it and it was wrong. So I instead, now I'm the person who goes to the meeting and builds the specs that are wrong and gives them to the programmers, right? But no, the reason I share that is that it's really important to me. I think there's a big value time save in getting it right the first time, right? And one of the things that tends to get skipped is that requirement step. We just go straight into the work. So let's talk about our heroes. Who are our people that we involve when we do these sorts of projects, right? In your average projects. And what are the strengths and attributes that these people have? So we have our subject matter experts, we have our SMEs, and our SMEs are our walking encyclopedias of all of the knowledge, right? They are the institutional lore of all of the things that we know that happens. They know how it works, they know why it has to do that, they know everything. These people, personality-wise, in terms of their strengths, tend to be very results-oriented. They don't need it to be perfect. They just need it to work, right? They know what's happening. They're very practical. I just need to do my job, right? So yeah, we implemented that feature 10 years ago. Nope, nobody actually uses it, right? We have our technical leads, our engineers. So these are the people who actually do the stuff. They make the donuts, right? These people tend to be solution-oriented, analytical, productive. Right? They don't want to talk about it. They just want to go do it. Can we just stop talking about this and let me do it already? I could have already coded the solution if you would let me get out of this meeting, right? We all work with these people. I was one of these people. This was my job, right? We have our project managers. So these are our organizers, right? We've got to herd the cats, keep everybody on task. These are people who tend to be very detail-oriented, very organized, again, very pragmatic, right? I don't need it to be pretty. I don't care if it's beautiful. I just need it to work and I need it to fit in budget on schedule, right? Sounds great. I'm not sure how it fits in our schedule, right? And then we have our QA folks who I like making fun of, but I love QA people. Good QA people are a precious, precious resource that I think it's fun to tease them a little bit. So what are our QA people? These are our verifiers, right? These are the people that test the stuff and find the gaps and hopefully break it before it gets broken in production by our real people. They are methodical, they are patient, and they are devious, like any good supervillain. So what happens if I put a negative number in that field, right? Good QA people take joy in breaking software. They come to you and say, I found another thing you missed. And they're valuable folks. So with those 4 roles and only those 4 roles, we have what I call the 4-piece band, right? It goes a little bit like this. So you've got our SME, that goes to the tech lead, that goes to the project manager, that goes to a QA. I need to report. Make that in 3 days. We can fit that in the schedule. Data's wrong. All right, I fixed it. Nope, still wrong. What about now? Okay, that looks good. We get back to our SME. This isn't what I wanted. And we're out of time, right? We're missing a piece here in our normal process where it goes straight from the customer to our solution fast. Let's just get it done person, right? They're missing a key role there. So what are we missing? We don't have a BSA in this band. So what are our BSAs? Our business systems analysts are questioners, right? The primary thing here you're looking for is curiosity. You want people that'll interview your customers, generate the documentation of the findings, and I like to say, ask annoying questions, right? These people are process oriented. They are inquisitive. They are communicative. They're good at translating from one thing to the other. They're good at generating metaphors that help people understand what you're trying to go for. So I understand that you need it, but why do you need it, right? So when we stick our BSA in here, it looks a little different. So we go from our SME to the BSA, to the tech lead, to the project manager, to the QA, right? So now I needed a report. Why do you need it? No, I need to reconcile that data. Well, what if we just added that data? Oh yeah, that'd work too. So now you're going to the project, to your technical people, right? They need us to add that data. No, they don't. No, really, they do. Here's why, right? So this is one of the key roles that I think the customers don't really see when you have the BSA types, is half of your role, probably 70% of your role, is you're working with the customers. You're figuring out with them, hey, what do you need? But there's also a part of this where you're now the interface with the development team, where you asked the challenging questions and you pushed really hard and you figured out all of the things so that when you go to your programming team and they just want to just get it done, right? And they say, no, this is the easy way. This is the fast way. Let's just get it done. That you have already asked all those things. And you go, no, I asked that. We talked about that exact scenario and I asked that exact question and here's where it didn't come in, right? So you have the ability then to tell them, no, they really do need this, right? Okay, fine, 4 days. PM, we can make that work. QA, the data is still wrong. So this gives us what I call the 5 W's of project management. We have what, why, how, when, and wrong, right? When you've got all 5 people, you have all 5 of these things in place. So what are we doing here? As the BSA, what is your output? What are you adding as value in this? You're asking annoying questions and you're communicating back and forth, but what are you spitting out of this? And the answer is requirements, right? You're generating this big old list of requirements, and requirements are hard. There's a reason people skip it. It's because they just don't want to do it because it's hard. And the good requirements are definitive, unambiguous, and verifiable. And they describe the product, not the process. So what do I mean by that? So definitive, right? Somebody gives you a thing and they say the system will be able to handle multiple concurrent users. Well, what does multiple mean? Right? That's not a definitive requirement. 2 reasonable, competent, intelligent people could read that requirement and both have different ideas in their head of what was intended, right? That's what you're trying to eliminate. So system shall accommodate up to 20 concurrent users, right? We've given it a specific number. We've given it something we can conclusively do. Users will be able to rate their experience. Well, rate it how? There's a bunch of different ways you can rate things, right? Users should be able to rate their experience on a 1 to 10 scale. Okay, we can do that. Emails be sent in a timely fashion. What's timely mean? So this is another one that you get a lot where people will say things like, it has to be usable. Well, that's great. We all agree it has to be usable. It has to be user-friendly. Absolutely. But that's not verifiable, right? So you need things there that are very clear where different people look at it and they have the same idea. So users will receive an email within 5 minutes of completing their purchase, right? Definitive, really clear, very obvious on all the things. Has to be unambiguous. System should be viewable through most browsers. Most? What does most mean? Do I have to go back to like old versions of Opera from the 90s, right? We have to specify exactly what are we going to be able to do here. What is this requirement? We'll use credit cards. Which credit cards? All the credit cards? Sister, you'll do pay using Visa or MasterCard credit cards, right? Professors will be notified of all changes. Notified how, right? Okay, well, we're going to send them an email every night whenever one of their students uses this system, right? You've got to be really clear about what you're trying to do. And it has to be verifiable. This is a really good litmus test. Can I test this? Can I write a test where I could clearly tell you this passed or it failed? If you can't write a test, it's not verifiable and it's not a requirement. System must be easy to use. Well, according to who? Measured how? All right, well, when we do our usability testing, 95% of people should be able to complete it in 5 minutes or less. Okay, that's measurable, right? We could go through and record that. Our credit card data must be handled securely. Okay, securely sounds good. That can mean a lot of different things to different people, right? Okay, well, we're going to use the established standard that we've published for the university for this, right? We're going to say that that's the standard we have to meet. Okay, we can verify that. All students will be notified of the service. Okay, notified how? How are you going to know? Oh, we're going to force them to go through, right? We're going to say as they go through their registration, they have to check off and say, I'm aware that this new service exists. So the piece that you're trying to do here is when you go through these requirements, you're trying to capture all of the really obvious things that everyone thinks they know, but in reality, people have different pictures in their heads. So we've all had this experience where somebody rolled out some new system, and within a minute you looked at it and went, oh my God, these people are idiots. It's not doing the most basic things, right? There's some really obvious fundamental pieces here that are missing. Well, that happened because they didn't build a good requirements list, right? They went through, they skipped it completely, or they did kind of a half-baked version of it. And things were a little bit fuzzy and they were a little bit ambiguous, and different people read the same thing and interpreted it a little bit differently. And when they built something, they built what they were given to build, but it missed some of those really obvious things, right? That's what you're trying to do here is this exercise, is you're going through and you're building this list of what are all of the things, and let's put them into really bulletproof language that there's no wiggle room, right? One of the things that I like to say when I'm doing these sessions, when everyone's kind of run out and they're not saying anything anymore, is you say, okay, I want you to think about that person you've worked with that whenever you ask them to do something, they do only exactly what you asked and they don't use their brain at all. And they just don't even think and do the next step. You'd be like, I need you to generate the report. And then they generate the report, but they never sent it to anyone because you didn't tell them they had to send it to the people, even though they should have known that, obviously, right? That's what you're building for, because the people you're handing this stuff off to don't have that background knowledge. They're not malicious. They just don't know, right? So you're generating a list that's going to be what people are using for those things. And it's got to have every little piece in it. So what are we describing when we're doing this? Well, it's really critical that the requirements describe the product, not the process. So what do I mean by that? I mean that you should be able to use your requirements list to vet completely different solutions. So if the original plan was, we're going to purchase Salesforce and we're going to do this with Salesforce, and we've gone through and we've done all of our meetings and we've generated our requirements lists, and we know that it's going to work for that, right? It's some purchased off the shelf solution that we're just going to, configure it to work. And then people come back and go, you know what? The Salesforce licensing talks fell through. It's just too much. We're going to build it in-house. We're going to have our own developers build it. That shouldn't change anything in your requirements. Shouldn't change anything. That same checklist of here's everything it has to do should make sense and work, whether it's an off-the-shelf solution or a vendor product or a custom solution, right? It's that same notion. So the way that you try to do that is you're making sure your requirements are solution agnostic. You're describing what it has to do, not how it does it. So frequently people will build the requirements and they'll bake in a bunch of assumptions about what they know the solution is going to be already. And they're going to put those things in the requirement when they do it. It's really easy to do. Systems should use the campus affiliates table for identity data. Well, that's just how we've always done it. That's our source that we always do. Well, why? Right? Is that the only way we could do that? Why do we need that? What are you trying to accomplish with that? Like, what does that need to do? Oh, well, we need everybody. Okay, so let's make that the requirement. is that we have everybody, and whatever way we can come up with to get everybody, that's what the actual requirement is here, right? A solution to be hosted on 3 servers with load balancing to generate availability. Well, what if we were in the cloud, right? Wouldn't that work too? What are we really trying to accomplish? Well, we need uptime. It has to be reliable. All right, well, how much uptime? Let's make that the requirement, right? And again, this sounds really obvious, but it can really change things. So for a brief period after I left Berkeley and before I came to UCSD, I worked for a defense contractor. It was an awful fit. I was miserable there, but it did give me one really useful story for this, which was they were moving their data center from California to Tennessee. And they brought me in to do requirements for this move, which none of the engineers thought had any value. And they were very difficult and obstinate about it. And at one point I'm talking to one of these guys, and he's got on his list that the servers must be transported by van from one place to the other. And I'm like, why? And he's like, well, that has to get there. I'm like, yeah, but why does it have to be by van? Like, do we have to load them in trucks? And he's like, well, it's what we got to do, right? You can write down whatever you want on your sheet, but we got to load it in a van and get it there. Why? Well, there's all these rules. There's these federal rules for security, and you've got to have an armed guard with it the whole time because it has confidential data and it has to be secured at all times and all of these things. I'm like, well, we can't do that by train. We can't do it by plane. So, I'm just doing what I do. I'm asking annoying questions. But the guy actually went back and looked at it, and he was like, you know what? They actually changed the regulations. We can do it by train now. And they ended up shipping it by train, and it saved them, I don't know, somebody else's money, but it was a real value save, right, that came out of it. Because when you dial down and you get down to why are we doing this, what are we actually trying to accomplish, right, you can get away from baking in that solution, and it really opens things up where people see new ideas. The other piece here, which is a common gotcha, is your requirements need to be discrete. Frequently people will be like, oh, well, the requirements aren't helpful because I can't test against these things, right? I need user stories. I need all these other artifacts to be able to do it because the requirements are too high level. Well, if your requirements are too high level, then you're not at the right level yet. So if you think your requirement needs sub requirements, you're not at the right level. You got to dig a little deeper. Users could use a web-based application to pay money and request a transcript. That's not a requirement. That's a whole system, right? There's dozens of requirements that are baked into that. This is where I have issues with user stories. Is frequently people will be like, well, I don't need a requirements list. I've got 5 user stories that cover all my use cases. We're good, right? But often baked into those user stories are tons of things that need to be defined that you really need at that level of detail where you can go back and check on it, right? The other piece here, right, is I can't emphasize enough how much that challenging people's statements and asking why is critical. If all you do is go and meet with them and then just write down everything they said they wanted and give it to them, I guarantee you they'll hate it. Say it again. I guarantee you they'll hate it, because people who are doing the job, your SMEs who are pragmatic, just give me a thing that just works. Their strengths are not abstract skills and process mapping and process improvement. Because if those were their strengths, they would have some other job. They wouldn't be people who would be great at being meticulous and taking pride in doing the same thing the same way every day at a high level of detail. We want people who take pride in those things and those roles. That doesn't diminish them in any way. But if you go to those people and offload on them the mental processing of trying to do the process improvement, you can't expect that they're going to immediately take to that and be good at it, right? That's just not what they're going to be good at. That's your job. Your job is to challenge those things. Your job is to ask why. Your job is to figure it out. What are you really doing this for? Do you really need to do this, right? You need to make sure that you understand what they need, because otherwise they're just going to tell you to rebuild the thing they've already got, but fix these 2 things. And you're going to try to adapt that into some new system. And it's just basically the same thing they've always had. It's just not good enough, right? So you've got to challenge, you've got to refine, why would we do that? My favorite question on all of these things is, what would happen if we didn't do that? We have to generate this report and send it to OP every year. Why? What if we didn't? Who would scream and how loud? Who goes to jail? What happens? Well, OP requires it. Do they? Can we ask them? It's shocking how often I've heard people say, oh, we have to do this for OP. And then we go and actually have the meeting with OP, and OP says, oh yeah, we haven't used that one for years. Are you guys still submitting that report? We didn't, like half the institutions aren't even sending that anymore. I didn't know you were still doing that, right? It is astounding how often that happens. There's this old joke, this little girl and her dad's teaching her how to cook a Christmas ham. And he gets the big ham and he puts it on the block. And the very first thing he does is he cuts 3 inches off the end and just throws it in the trash. And she said, why did you cut so much of it off and you throw it away? And he said, well, that's the first step. That's how you cook a ham. She said, that doesn't make sense. He said, that's how you cook a ham. That's how you do it, right? So she finds grandma. She goes to grandma and she says to grandma, how do you, what do you do with the ham? She's like, oh, well, you cut off 3 inches and you put it in the thing. Said, that seems really wasteful. Said, that's just how you cook a ham. So then she finds great grandma. And she says to great grandma, well, why do we cut 3 inches off the ham? And grandma said, well, the stove's only this big. If you don't cut 3 inches off, it doesn't fit. Right? It is shocking how many things we have where we're cutting 3 inches off the ham, where you'll ask people, why do you do that? And they have no idea. That's how I was trained. That's how the person who trained me to do it, right? You've got to really dig. But often if you ask the question, what would happen if I didn't cut 3 inches off the ham? Like if I didn't cut it off and I put it in, would it burn? No. Would it cook unevenly? No, actually, it might cook more evenly. You've got the skin on that side. Well, have we tried that? Right? Now, the challenge when you're doing that is that you have to challenge what they do without making people feel like you're challenging them personally. Right? It's really important to show the adequate respect and deference to their work, to their professionalism, to their expertise, right? So I understand that you need to do this. I understand that it's really important, or I understand it's important to you. I need you to help me understand why, because I don't understand why we need to do this. Can you help me understand why this is a necessary step, so that then when I'm in the next meeting with our programmers, I can argue on your behalf and say, no, they really need this and here's why, right? Because you've got to dig into that. If you want to give them the correct solution, the thing that actually does what they want, you have to understand their needs better than they do, because they only have to understand it well enough to do their job. If you are going to do it, you've got to understand it, not just this is what they do to do their job, but this is why this happens. And this is why their customers need it. And this is why their customers need it. So that when somebody says to you, well, what if we did this completely different thing? You're like, oh yeah, that would work because it checks off these boxes, right? Yeah, we're allowed to do that. We could handle that process that way. That's good, right? If you haven't challenged, if you haven't asked those underlying questions and really, really get it, you understand how the pieces fit, then when someone throws a curveball at you, you don't know, right? And then you're just saying, well, I don't know. I'll have to go back and ask them. And they don't know, right? That's part of the job, is you've got to go in and find order out of that chaos. You've got to play architect a little bit and dig through the layers of what's happening here and try to figure out, well, why are we doing this, right? This takes time. This is part of why people don't want to do it. Partially, people don't want to do it because this isn't their area of strengths. It's not their job, right? Your programmers just want to get it done. Your people who do the job just want to do their job. You need to find people to do this role that are curious and ask questions and are good at translating, right? You've got to find people who want to do this work, but it takes time. And frequently people will just say, look, we don't have time to do that part. We all understand what we need here. We don't have time to spend a bunch of meetings hammering out the requirements. Let's just get this thing done. Our schedule does not allow us enough time to do that. And that is a critical mistake. And see it happen over and over and over again. It is far better to spend however much time you've got to do doing those requirements than it is after somebody rolled it out and looked at it. And one person says, well, that's not what I told you. And the other one says, that's what you said. I've got it here in my notes, right? So it saves so much time to make sure everything is really clear, because once it's built, it's way harder to go back and change it. So let's imagine you had some really complicated requirement that came up. And GPA calculations. Right now I'm working on the current SIS. I can't remember if it's 5 or 6, but there are 5 or 6 different versions of the GPA, depending on who it's for. There's the one that UCOP requires, and there's another one for the state, and there's another one for the federal government, and there's another one for the colleges. They all have different rules about, oh, if you repeat credit on this course, it counts for your GPA, but not if it's this course. And if it was pass fail, it counts for this one, but not for that one. There's these absurdly complicated rules for how we calculate all these different GPAs, right? I know in my future, well, no, I've already gone through another requirements. I know in my future, we're going to have design sessions about how are we actually going to do all of these. They're going to take time. It's going to be annoying. Someone in those meetings is going to say, can we just go do this already? Right? But what happens when you go do it is you get it wrong. If it is so complicated that it takes hours just to figure out the requirements and get everyone to agree with it, what are the chances that somebody's going to get it right? The different people have the same idea in their head and that they're actually going to get it right the first time. And then what's the cost to go back and rebuild it and re-implement it? And then if you get that wrong the second time, what's the cost to go back and rebuild it and re-implement it a third time, right? So it feels counterintuitive, but that time spent doing the requirements, building your map and mapping your trip and planning it out really saves you time later on. So let's talk about what you do with these things. So you've invested the time and you've asked the annoying questions and you've challenged all of your customers and you've got this bulletproof, verifiable, unambiguous, definitive list of really great requirements. Well, now what do? Well, now you're positioned where you can have traceability. This is where things get really fun. I'm a weirdo. I think this is fun. So you have different phases of projects, right? So you're going from the initiation phase to definition, to design, to development, to testing. And in each one of these phases of a project, you've got key artifacts that come out of these things, right? You've got something you delivered as you come out of this. So in the initiation phase, you've got your subject matter expert saying, hey, I need a thing, right? Your definition phase is your BSAs working with that customer and really defining what it is they need. Your design phase is your developer saying, okay, here's how I'm going to do it. Now I've done it. And then your QA people, right, that come back and tell you what's wrong. So out of each one of these phases, you've got a deliverable. Oh, I'm sorry, and I forgot. Over this whole project, you have a PM, right? And the PM is saying, there we go faster. I gotta have my cute little word bubbles. So out of each one of these things, you've got some key deliverables that drop out of them. So at the end of the initiation phase, you should have a project charter. What's our scope? What's out of scope? Who are the stakeholders? Who cares about this? What are we building here and why, right? At the end of your definition phase, you should have the requirements doc. You've got that big list of requirements. There's also an accompanying doc with that is human readable. Something you can give to your boss's boss, or that you can give to the software vendor at the beginning to kind of orient them, that says, these are the high level things we need, that ties into that requirements. You've got a design doc. Okay, you've got, and this is really hard, you've got to force your tech leads to do this. No one wants to do this. Here is how we're going to satisfy all those requirements, right? And then you've got testing, you've got test cases, right, that goes through all that. Over this whole thing is a requirements traceability matrix. It's an RTM. The RTM ties your requirements to your design, to your test cases. So here's what we said we'd do. Here's how we said we'd do it. Here's how we know it got done, right? So what that looks like is, oh, sorry, I've got a slide before that. So again, this is tying the requirements to the design to the tests. So everything that was promised got built, everything that was built got tested, right? Yeah. So what that looks like is basically a spreadsheet. There are tools for this. We don't have any of them right now on campus. I'm just doing this in Google Sheets. Hopefully we're going to have better tools, but it works, right? So during the definition phase, what you have is those requirements, the part that we're talking about today. So you've got some sort of ID that you want to put on these things. You can load them into Jira as a requirements issue type if you're using Jira. You've got text on that requirement, and then it's got a status, right? So when I first put that on the list, it's still pending. I haven't gotten sign off from people on this yet, right? Somebody said I need it, and I put it on my list. Until I've gone back to my key stakeholders and said, hey, someone requested this requirement. And they go, yeah, we need that, right? It stays at a pending status, and then it goes to accepted. Later on in your project, you've got 3 other statuses that can happen with these things, right? It can get deferred. Yes, we all agree we need to do that, but we can't do it in phase 1. Well, don't delete it off your requirements list. Flag it as a deferred requirement, right? We said we were going to do this. We captured that we need to do it. We're just not going to do it yet. It can get rejected. So the part where I was working with Nikki on Oracle procurement, right? Our old marketplace solution had really fine-grained purchasing controls. When we went through and made the requirements list for procurement, we had all of those controls in there. If it's over $50, it's this rule. If it's this thing, it's this rule. When we looked at Oracle procurement, it couldn't do a bunch of those, right? So on the list, documented, I have these requirements that got rejected, right? We said it has to do it. It can't do it. We have acknowledged and documented that that was important, but could not be accomplished, right? That's a rejected requirement. The rest of them go to implemented status. When it's done, you go through and say it's implemented, right? This was accepted, it was signed off on, it's been implemented, we put it out there, right? So then your next stage of your project is your design phase. So you're gonna hold your developers to the toes to the fire. You're gonna make them give you some sort of document that says, what am I gonna do? And then you sit down with them and you make them go through on the design doc. You go through your requirements list and you say, I have a requirement that says it has to do this. Show me in your design doc, or it explains to me how it's going to do that. And then they grumble and go, okay, I guess I'll add that. If that's really obvious, it's just this one field I have to flip. Okay, let's go and note which field are we flipping to which value. Let's go through and put all this stuff in, right? Inevitably, every single time, there will be something where you'll go, all right, and now this one, it says I have to do this one. And they go, oh yeah, we got to do that, don't we? Yeah, I don't know how we're going to do that. Like, okay, so now you need to go and work on your design doc and figure that out. Because in a week, I'm going to schedule another meeting with you. We're going to go through this again. And I'm going to make sure that everything I've got in my requirements list has some place in this design doc where it says how it's going to get done, right? This is how you force people to make sure they thought about everything before they start just building the damn thing, because that's what everyone wants to do. So you make them build some sort of design doc. I've written half of them myself. You end up having to write it for them, but you sit down with them and write it together, or you make them brain dump, and then you write a doc and come back and say, is this right? Right? But you force it to make sure that every requirement has some reference there to how it's going to get implemented. Then it's time for testing, right? So you've got all of your test cases off in some system, and you link to those test cases. You'll note some requirements might require multiple things to test them, right? So this one says, I got to use Visa, MasterCard, PayPal to be able to pay. Well, those are 3 separate tests. That's fine. As the BSA, just really linear, you've got your BSA hat on. Your job is to make sure that every requirement has at least one test, right? That you can go through and verify it. So you're going through on this. So what about test completions, right? So what I just showed gives you the requirement, it gives you the design, it says that there is a test, but it doesn't tell you, yes, this has passed all of the tests and it's ready to go live. It does not answer that question. And it is not intended to answer that question, because test completions get messy, right? You end up with multiple rounds of testing. Being able to just say, yes, every requirement has been tested and is ready is extremely difficult to answer in a 2-dimensional sheet. If you try to put the tests in there, it suddenly becomes this weird 3-dimensional thing where you're duplicating rows to say, oh, well, in test cycle 1, this passed, but then there was a bug. And then in test cycle 2, we fixed it. Oh, but then there was a bug. But in test cycle 3, we fixed it for good, right? It becomes very difficult. Now, there's really good software for these things, right? There's software like Qmetry. There's a bunch of really good testing software that is made for exactly this. You have test cases, you put those test cases into releases. You can say all of the tests for this release have been tested, right? Those things do those jobs really well. You want the requirements that they're using to be the requirements for your list, but trying to stick your test completions into your RTM will make it really messy. Your PM is going to ask you to do it. You have to say no. Right? It will make everyone's life more complicated if you try to do that. So in summary, BSAs are people go and interview customers and define requirements and sometimes do other stuff, right? Frequently, I get pushback on this one where I say the BSAs just do the requirements. Well, that's often not the case, right? I've written test cases. I've been the QA lead for stuff. I'm not as good at it, but as a real QA person, but I've done it, right? I've been the PM for things because they're small projects and people have to wear multiple hats, right? If you have a large enough project, you really want somebody whose sole focus is making sure the requirements are done correctly and that they're being implemented. Because asking them to switch hats on those things can make things really complicated. Requirements, definitive, unambiguous, verifiable. They tell you the product, not the process, right? It needs to get from point A to point B in this amount of time. I don't care if it drives, flies, tunnels underground. Doesn't matter. It has to be able to get from here to there, right? Requirements traceability ties the requirements to the design to the tests. What we said we do, how we said we do it, how we know it's done. Anybody have any questions?